Let's bring in our legal panel to talk a little bit more about all of this. Joining us, our CNN senior legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin. Also joining us, the criminal defense attorney, Pate, and the former federal prosecutor, Tanya Miller. Jeffrey, let me play a little bit more of this interview that ABC News had with this juror.
For myself, he's guilty because the evidence shows he's guilty.
He's guilty of
killing Trayvon Martin. But we couldn't prove that intentionally he killed him. And that's the way that the law was read to me.
Jeffrey, could the prosecution have done a better job with this whole issue of intent?
You know, jury instructions are hard for anyone to understand. I've heard them a million times, and I find them hard to understand. But it's quite clear that Maddie, the juror, at least now, doesn't have a clear understanding of what was required, because that was not the law as she described it. And in other parts of the interview, I think she garbled the law a little bit. One thing you could have said the prosecution could have done is, in its summation, talk more about the jury instructions, explain why the elements of the crime were met by the prosecution here. Might have made a difference, might not have, but clearly this juror, at least at this point, does not have much of an understanding for what was really required to find George Zimmerman guilty.
Tanya, let me get you to react to what Mark O'Mara, the defense attorney for George Zimmerman, posted a little while ago. Why Zimmerman juror B29 is a model juror. That's what he entitled his statement. People may disagree with self-defense laws, but a juror's job is not to decide what a law should be. Her job is to apply the facts presented at trial to the laws they are instructed about. This is the essence of what we seek in a juror: the ability to use one's common sense, apply the law to the facts, agree not to be swayed by sympathy or emotion, no matter how loudly it's argued by the prosecutors, and decide a lawful and fair verdict. Do you agree that juror B29 was a, quote, model juror?
Well, I don't know if she was a model juror or not. I certainly think that she approached the process in good faith. I don't think there's any reason to doubt that she did that. But I think Jeffrey makes a good point. What is really clear when we hear this juror speak is that she really misunderstood the law. She did not appropriately apply the law to the facts because she didn't understand it. And the reason why she didn't understand it could be because she wasn't really given that roadmap by the prosecution team during trial. As a homicide prosecutor for many years, we were taught to spend a significant amount of time talking to the jury about the law, giving them each and every point that they needed to go back into that jury room and argue for your position as a prosecutor. And I just don't think she was equipped to do that in this case.
You agree, Paige?
I agree 100%. I mean, we have to remember that this juror went back into the jury room ready to find Zimmerman guilty. The problem became that she could not convince the other jurors and could not hold her own ground when they started arguing the law to her. And the reason she couldn't is because the prosecution did not give her that roadmap, did not talk about the law in their closing arguments like the defense did. And the defense did it very effectively. Emotion is important, but you're not going to persuade a jury in closing arguments. You have to give them arguments to use on your behalf back in the jury room.
Was the issue of intent, Jeffrey, the same as far as second-degree, convicting someone of second-degree murder or convicting someone of manslaughter?
No, it's entirely different. Manslaughter requires a level of almost negligence, a very low level of intent, whereas second-degree murder in the Florida statute requires a level of almost hatred. So, I mean, the level of intent is almost entirely different. And so that was one level of misunderstanding that Maddie reflected in her comments. It may be that she just didn't understand it. You know, she couldn't recite it a couple weeks later, or maybe she never understood it.
So who do you blame, Tanya, for the confusion surrounding the jury instructions?
Well, part of it is just the nature of jury instructions. I mean, as Jeffrey alluded to, they are very confusing. As lawyers, it sometimes takes us a while to master what they mean and to translate that into normal layman's terms for a jury to understand. So in part, it's just the nature of jury instructions, but as the prosecutor, you have the burden of proof. You have to convince that jury that you have provided evidence to each element of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt. To that end, you have to give the jurors a clear layman's understanding of what the law is so that they can go back there and apply it to the facts. So I think there's the defense did a really good job of explaining the law as it relates to their theory of the case. The prosecutors gave a powerful closing argument, but left out a little bit of detail as it related to the law, and I think the law just is confusing for lay people without that help.
And Paige, let me play this other little clip from this juror, what she told ABC. Watch this.
I'm thinking to myself, did I go the right way? Did I go the wrong way? I know I went the right way because by the law and the way it was followed is the way I went. But if I would have used my heart, I probably would have went a hung jury. And believe it with all my heart because I do have kids.
She was the only juror of the 6 women on the jury who started off right after the trial with a guilty verdict as far as second-degree murder is concerned. She wound up many hours later not guilty, an acquittal. How unusual is that to go all the way from second-degree murder, forget about that, forget about manslaughter, and wind up not guilty?
It doesn't happen often, but it's not rare. Many times, once a juror gets back into the jury room, they are going to be persuaded by the other jurors. And that's especially true if most of them are on the other side. And that's why jury selection is so incredibly important. And when you had this particular jury, this composition of folks, I think the verdict that came out, not guilty, was in some ways.
But remember, Paige, and let Jeffrey weigh in on this as well, when they first went into that room after all the hours and hours of testimony, it was basically 3-3. 3 for not guilty, but 2 guilty for manslaughter, 1 guilty, this woman who spoke to ABC, of second-degree murder. So the debate was only just beginning.
It was, Wolf, but there's really nothing unusual or certainly nothing inappropriate about that kind of vote initially, then one that changes. That's why they call it deliberation. I mean, we could have a system where each juror pushes a button and you have a vote right at the end. But the idea behind deliberation is that the jurors talk to each other and listen to each other and sometimes become persuaded. So, you know, in my experience talking to jurors, it's often that there is a non-unanimous reaction when you first go back into the jury box. But after listening to colleagues, they usually, not always, but usually come to a unanimous agreement, and that's what happened here.
Jeffrey Toobin, Paige Pate, Tanya Miller. Guys, thanks very much for joining us. Lots more to discuss, and we'll do it down the road. When we come back, the